population growth could lead to contamination of water, and I want to make sure that I preserve that water quality, so let's regulate population growth. Well, that's a misnomer, because we don't know that. If we did know that, it would be a different story. And if we knew it for fact, it would be a different story. But currently, and this research that I cited was published in 2012, we don't yet have the statistics, the numbers to prove that. So if we're going to say that we're going to make a much broader claim, a much larger claim about regulating population as such, based on a potential claim within that set that there could be a relationship between water pollution and increased population, wow, that's like two bad moves, right? You're making a generalization based on one specific instantiated point, and this is a no-no, right? You don't make universal generalizations based on existential instantiations. To be technical, you can make existential instantiations from a universal generalization, but you don't say, hey, I met this one guy and he was cool, therefore all guys of his type are cool. You don't say, well, there might be a connection, a correlation, a conditional relationship between increased population and water contamination, and thus any attempt to regulate would lead also to water. I mean, it now should seem that, no, this really is sketchy. When I initially said it, it didn't sound sketchy at all. It sounded rather plausible. But now you're seeing I'm not making an appeal to any ought or should. I'm making an appeal to the internal consistency of the logic that I've derived for myself, and saying, based on what I've already said, in order for me to maintain consistency, I can't say both, yes, there is this relationship and it's a profoundly strong relationship, but we shouldn't select that. That wouldn't make any sense. No, this relationship is weak. This relationship, increased population, is a subset of the attempt to regulate population, and thus now I can say, no, yeah, that consistency isn't there. I don't see that connection as clear as maybe I once thought, and I'm going to eventually end up denying this. You'll see in a second exactly how I do this, right? Should deny any attempt to regulate population growth, since we cannot prove, as legitimized by the previous citation I just showed you, that doing so would result in decreased water pollution. There isn't that empirical fact yet. It might be the case that in a year, 2 years, 5 years, that there's enough empirical observation and data collection to verify a direct connection between, or correlation. The strongest correlation is still no proof, but the strongest correlation that we can possibly have, that no, there is in fact a direct correlation between population growth and water contamination, but we don't have that fact yet. So an attempt to regulate population to preserve water quality is stupid then, until we have the facts, right? That's not being rational. That's precisely what it is to not be rational, right? To try and then take something that you don't have empirical evidence for and act on it without that evidence is sort of not rational. You gotta at least have a hunch. But you need more than a hunch, right? We're talking about regulating the population. You're gonna need quite a bit more than a hunch. We're not talking about, should I go to the store, or should I go out to eat, or should I go to watch a movie? We're talking about, should we regulate the population? First of all, just even saying that word, that phrase, regulate population, sounds spooky, right? But should I introduce factors to regulate the population so that I can keep the water clean? Don't know about that. Don't know about it. So, note to scientists who might be doing future research, who might be publishing journals. This is a side note. This is sort of has nothing to do with the lecture series that I'm here. Note what your findings will mean. The question is, I know what your findings will mean. And I know that you're currently doing the research because I found that you're currently doing the research. Note what your findings will mean. And I'll let all the ethicists chime in at this. This is where the ethicists come in at this point. For those of you that understand the implications, great. For those of you that don't, I apologize. I'm moving on. So, this is sort of the behind the scenes, right? In building this argument, I knew that the empirical weakness of establishing a connection between population growth and water pollution in the hypothetical syllogism, if population growth increases, then the likelihood for water pollution also increases. I knew that that was weak because I found an author to say that the connection isn't that strong yet. They're currently doing research. Just be vigilant in terms of environmental protection. It's a good stance. And I like that. It's a conservative. In that regard, I do like that sort of conservative stance. And not conservative in the left-right conservative. Growth and water pollution in hypothetical syllogism will give me an opportunity to create a weaker disjunct. Oh wow, this isn't that strong, this relationship isn't that strong. In the future, if I need to use a disjunctive claim, what I'm going to do is build my disjunctive claim on the sort of the lack of strength in this conditional claim. Okay? Would give me the opportunity to create a weaker disjunct, which I would soundly dismiss here, and which was itself a product of the logic of previous arguments. Remember, the implication came after the formal use of hypothetical syllogism, and we just put it there so that we could build our disjunctive claim. In terms of persuasion, my real desire is to present part 2 of DS as the viable alternative, and I legitimize this by contrasting it with the weaker disjunctive claim. So here is my example. I really think I only wrote one example. Yeah, I really only wrote one example because I didn't need to flesh it out anymore, because in the end it ended up being really solid. Embedded, so obviously the same thing, right? I embed the original claim in black, the new stuff is in red, so here's what we got, the old stuff. In attempts to decrease the consumption and pollution of our water supply, either we attempt to, this is the first part, either we attempt to regulate population growth, or we attempt to regulate, we attempt to regulate their behavior, that is the behavior of the population. Since we recognize that the increased population will affect both levels of available water, and we know that for a fact, that is empirically verified, and possibly speaks to the uncertainty of the correlation as established in line 2 of hypothetical syllogism and citations, right? And possibly the levels of contamination within those supplies. We don't yet know that. We know that there's a connection, probably, but we haven't yet acquired enough sort of empirical data. And I don't mean this theoretically, I'm talking about 2012. Right now, we scientists, hard scientists, haven't yet established enough empirical data. And I just thought it was the coolest thing that I stumbled into this based on the logic. I am sort of now interested in looking into this more, but I know the current will take me somewhere else. Since the strength, this is the new stuff, since the strength of the correlation connecting increased population growth with increased water pollution itself required further verification. What does that mean? Technically what I'm saying is, reader, remember when I used hypothetical syllogism line 2 of my previous argument, and then I used the citation to demonstrate that that correlation wasn't as strong as it appears? That's what that says. It doesn't really say that, but that's really what it says, right? That's the code. Oh, I just love it. Since the strength of the correlation connecting increased population growth with increased water pollution itself requires further empirical verification, as noted by these dudes' claim that, quote, the net effect on the risk of water quality impairment is uncertain, one would not be justified. One would not be justified, right? One would not be justified in making that claim. I've just done it. I just did it. I just did the negation. And not only did I do the negation, I answered the question as to why I negated it in that one sentence. Because the correlation isn't that strong, as cited by these dudes, then you can't make the claim that you can regulate population as a means of, preventing the contamination of water. We don't have that ability yet. It sounded good at first. And this is what makes you really, really good, because sometimes people propose these arguments and it sounds really, really good, and you say, oh, well, I just recognize. No. What you've proposed really doesn't work. Why? Because it's connected to all these other things, right? So that's the negation. That's part 3 of the disjunctive syllogism. In attempting to regulate population growth, since its relation to water contamination requires further empirical verification. Thus, again, this is just my wording. You would have worded this differently. You need to practice writing a lot so that you can get a sort of tonal cadence and, get the regular, it sounds cool, rather than just the logic, because logic by itself sounds sort of robotic. And I'm not, as I said, I'm not writing this for publication, so I don't really care. It's really choppy in sections, but logically it's rock solid, right? And the idea is to show you that you can do it, and then you can finesse it on your own. Thus, it is certainly more practical